definitely. I love history. I'm very interested in, learning about what inspired you to write these books, and for the viewers, they can learn more about the topic of these books. For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and where you're from?
Certainly. My name is Levin. I am the Henry Eldridge Bourne Professor of History Emeritus from Case Western Reserve, and I'm speaking to you from my present residence in St. Louis, Missouri, where I retired, but I'm not exactly retired. But anyway, and I was a professor in the history department and with a secondary appointment in art history uh, for about 35 years at Case Western.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, so I know a lot about Case Western Reserve, definitely. And currently, I'm in Ghana, so if we have any technological difficulties, I appreciate your patience.
I'll be patient. Well, it's great to be in Ghana. I must be quite different from St. Louis, and I guess we don't have time to talk about your experiences there. But what would you like me to start with?
Oh, okay. I would definitely like to know, when did you develop a passion for history and art and writing? Was this something that you got into as a child, or did you get into it later in life?
Well, I want to say that if you look at the titles of my books, which I'll go through in a minute, they seem so varied in topic, and they kind of reflect the my life or my life interests and a lot of my experiences that come into the kinds of questions I asked in the books and tried to answer. I come from a family where people did a lot of work with their hands. I might say I'm a historian of science and technology. So, but people in my family did a lot of work with their hands. They made art, they sewed. My grandfather made shoes, and he actually made them out of old tires. But he also had a shoe repair shop, and he made bows and arrows. My son is a potter. So and then we have scientists, research scientists, and I also spent a year in France when I was an undergraduate, and I got interested in France and the history of France, the revolution, but also French culture and art. And then I've also worked in museums. I was an art history major as an undergraduate, and I worked in the art museum at the University of Michigan, and I loved working with the objects. And so a lot of this filters into the books I've written. And the first book I wrote, which came out of my doctoral dissertation, put together history, art history, museums, world's fairs, and government art policy. Because when I my a passion for history. I can't say I had a passion for history, but I had a passion for answering questions that needed that were historical or had a historical dimension. So, and when I came out of art history, I went into history at the University of Massachusetts because I needed to answer questions that historical methods could help me answer. So the question I had when I came out of living in France was, why is art so important to the French, and why did the French government put artists in jail for making say caricatures that made fun of the king, and what did they think about art that made it so politically volatile? In the United States, we have something of that in the Comstock laws, which put people in jail for pornography through the mail and things like that. So, but in France, it's much more pervasive. At least it was, let's say, up until the Second World War. So that was my question. And what I found was I had to look at the government policies that not only said this kind of art is dangerous, but this is the kind of way we want to use art to form public opinion, to shape the way people see reality and the way they work. And what I found is in the late 19th century, at least, when they had their first national modern education system, that there was an effort on the government to introduce mechanical drawing, art, and a combination of art and science. And they also used World's Fairs. So the 1889 World's Fair that brought us the Eiffel Tower was an effort to educate the public to see that art and science, design and technology could make a new world and a new reality that would be better for many people. So that was my first book, which is, and then the second one, which was the most fun I think I've ever had with a book, was this one, which you may have seen, Taye. I don't know. It's actually, I think you can get it online through the Case Library, but it's When the Eiffel Tower Was New, French Visions of Progress at the Centennial of the Revolution. And in that, it's a book, but also it was an exhibition that traveled to several places. And what I did was I used photographs and prints and posters from the late 19th century France to show how French people were understanding new technologies. This was a time when the modern bicycle was invented, when electricity began to be used for public lighting, when improved gas lighting came along, when ready-to-wear clothing, all the things that became industrialized. And so there was a lot of effort, first of all, to publicize, to advertise these things. And there's some wonderful advertisements for bicycles, in particular, advertising bicycle races. Women were very popularly used in the imagery to sell things. So women and bicycles was very important. So I don't know whether your viewers can see this, but here's a ad for a bicycle called the Liberator. And anyone who learned to ride a bicycle must know the first time you ride a bicycle, you're free. You can go anywhere much faster. Your parents can't see you anymore. You can go across the street and travel with your friends many places. So the Liberator, but for women, this is particularly liberating. And there is also a lot of complaining about women being too liberated, that it was bad for them. So, but so that was another book that I did. And the Eiffel Tower itself was very important in that period as a symbol of progress, as a symbol of French progress, and of a new building construction method of iron steel construction, which became rather than stone. And we all know that the beginning of skyscraper construction began at that time. The experience of riding up in an elevator, all these things were important. And that was a lot of fun to do. And also the techniques for advertising, the new kind of color lithography techniques that made mass advertising possible came in then. So that my art history sort of clicked in there. And a lot of historians, especially at the time I began in the 1970s and 80s, were very leery of images as historical documents. And so I feel like that was part of what my campaign as a historian was to get historians to see images as historical documents and to learn how to interpret them. So I did a collection of essays by myself and other people called Cultures of Control, where I just was interested in the philosophy and the psychology and the mechanisms for controlling machines, engineering machines to make them do what we want to do, but also the psychological controls that um, businesses, educators can use designers. I don't know where you are in Ghana, but if you think about the way your phone is designed, it's designed in a certain way to make you use it in a certain way. I mean, that's a control. And it's also designed to function in a certain way. Those are mechanical controls. But we are educated by the machine to use it in a certain way. We're under the control of it. So I was interested in that facet of it and had a number of people write essays. And then I did another collection with friends where I got some colleagues together and we did urban modernity, which really has gotten a lot of good publicity. I guess I could say it's a success because it's been pirated and you can get it online without buying it anyway. But it's different. We used different cities and looked at how they became modern in the late 19th century, how they became, modern sewers and water systems, roads, metros, underground railroads, electric lighting, and so forth. And anyone that saw the Paris Olympics was looking pretty much at a city the part of the city that had been built actually by World's Fairs, the Eiffel Tower, the Grand Palais and the Petit Palais, the Alexander III Bridge, the borders of the Seine itself, all that had been developed through World's Fairs. So I've become kind of a mini expert on World's Fairs, and I happened in St. Louis to live across the street from the St. Louis 1904 fair. But and then my other sort of love, I guess, or hobby horse, you want to call it, was women's history, or really as a woman was older and went back to school, and I was really lucky to get the job at Case Western. And I feel like I came into this good situation to earn my living and get an education through the women's movement and through the efforts women have made. So when I had an opportunity to write a history of women in science at Mount Holyoke, and really turned into the history of women, higher education for women in science, I took it. And in that, I discovered that I went in sort of thinking of it as a feminist topic, but it really turned out to be a topic that involved religion and science, that the religious movement of the Second Great Awakening, the evangelical Protestant mainline liberal movement of the 19th century, made opened opportunities for women to found colleges, to go to college and become scientists, with a lot of gender discrimination, I might say, and a lot of struggle that they had. But I found also then that led me to another question, is why some of the graduates from Mount Holyoke went abroad to South Africa, to India, to the Middle East, to China and Japan, and founded colleges for women, modeled on Mount Holyoke, to educate them to become, to be able to earn their livings in professions like science. So my next question was, how did they do that? Because they went as missionaries. These were sponsored by American Protestant missions. And so I wanted to know, how this combination of missions and science and women all figured together. And that's the book I'm working on now. So I think our time is kind of limited. Do I have time to just make 2 points?
Yeah, definitely. Take your time. This is very interesting information.
Oh, okay. Well, the 2 points I wanted to leave viewers with were, one, that I've always been just amazed by human beings' creativity. That not being artists, but that human beings throughout history have just had amazing ability to turn raw materials into usable things. I mean, it's really, I was thinking, well, what, like my fork my fork that I got at Target for in a collection. It's a marvel, like how much ingenuity went into producing this metal fork that we use every day. And there are so many things that human beings make and invent and do that to turn the world and make it usable. That just, I think, studying that and recognizing that ingenuity is really fascinating. And I think communicating that to people, that's why I think museums are so important. That I did run the museum studies program at Case when in the history department. And to communicate this and find ways to communicate it to people is really important. And I think it speaks to almost everybody. The downside of this history is, or the sad story in this history is that with the Industrial Revolution, we benefited in many ways, but a lot of skills get lost. And we're constantly having to reinvent work. And a lot of people with skills that were wanted and paid for and marketable under certain technologies, when the new technologies and the new systems come in, their skills are no longer needed. And you need a new generation with new skills, but the old generation has to find something else to do. And that's the sad part. The other sad part is the destruction of so much stuff, with just purposefully and in warfare and haphazardly. So, but that's the drama and the dynamic of history. So my second thought is really has to do with doing history. You asked me the fascination of it. I as I said, I ask questions, and then it's kind of like a detective story. I don't know whether you remember the old Law and Order television program. I think they still have spin-offs of it, but it used to be two parts. One part was the crime being committed, and the police go and figure out, who robbed this bank, and they arrest somebody. And then the DA's office starts investigating, and they find out, well, these people didn't really rob the bank, somebody else did. Or they didn't rob the bank for the money, they robbed it for some other reason. So doing history, at least I have found, is kind of like that, is you have an idea, I'm going to look at Mount Holyoke, and I think it's a feminist story, and I'll look at how women were kept out of mainline science. And you start looking at the documents and stuff, and you say, oh no, these documents have a different story. Like they did do science, they did have a place in the college, and they did, and also, rather than religion and science being at odds, religion and science partnered. And it did. So it's a different story. And to me, that's so interesting, because also it changes the historical record and it makes us understand things. So I think people should not be afraid of history, that history isn't names and dates only. It's a way of thinking. Well, people talk about critical thinking, but it's a way of looking at the evidence and asking questions, and then looking at all the evidence and coming to conclusions based on how you would, evaluating things fairly. So do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you sharing that. You had mentioned a few things I had wanted to respond to. So, like I say, I'm currently in Ghana, and this past weekend I was able to go see the people do the kente cloth weaving. I'm not sure if you're familiar with kente cloth, but they make the traditional dresses for the kings and the queens, and they do the Adinkra printing and stuff like that. So it's been going on for hundreds of years, and they've been able to maintain it. But at the same time, the world is advancing technologically. So they have news articles, and they say, is Ghana losing its culture? Are we losing our tradition? So it's like a tug of war kind of thing. But it's amazing to see something like that made.
Oh yes, they use block printing. Is that they use wooden blocks, or how do they do it?
Well, yeah. So the Adinkra printing they make the ink from the barks of trees. So they scrape the bark off the tree, they break it up. You ever seen like they take the sticks and they pound it and they pound it into tiny pieces and they sit it in water for 7 days. They take it out, dry it, sit it for another 7 days. And that's the ink. They'll cook it and then they'll take the different symbols. So each symbol means something different. One symbol may mean peace, another symbol may mean love, another symbol may mean loyalty, and then they'll dip the wooden, I guess it's like a die or it's like a carving, and then they'll dip it in the print, and then they'll
Yeah.
place it on, different types of cloth, and they'll use kente cloth, for example. So the kente cloth is, if you got a lot of money, they'll make it out of silk, but the average person, they may get nylon or cotton or something like that, and it's very beautiful, very colorful, so.
Yeah, a friend sent me a dress she had made, but she was in, or is she in Africa? Not Congo. Um, it was a French colony. I can't remember what it is now, but she sent me a dress, and I've seen kente cloth. People here in the States sometimes wear them, and they dress up. It's lovely, and it's one of those, as you said, it's one of those things that's under duress. Already they're using nylon and silk somebody else wove, but it becomes a specialty that's only a few people do, and it loses some of its spiritual quality, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess with time, the younger generation, they're getting more into, computers and cell phones and laptops, and they're trying to, make their mark in the world. Where back in the old days, like for example, you were speaking about the women, the kente could only be made by the men, and some women would try to get into the production of the kente weaving, but the men would tell them, you have to stay home, you have to watch the children, so they would try to chase them out and stuff like that. So
So now do women do it?
nah, it's still, from what I've seen, is mostly still men. They kind of, made that clear. But it's a very, very, like you say, a very beautiful cloth. Now I wanted to ask you before I forget, have you ever thought about making any of your books or using any of your research to do, maybe like a documentary?
Um, no, I haven't. Nobody's ever approached me. I don't think I have not the knowledge of how to do that. And I'm not sure. I think that obviously the Mount Holyoke story would be the one, or but I don't know that the others. There might be well, actually, I should say, take back what I said about a documentary. I was approached by somebody from ABC, I believe. They interviewed me because they're thinking of doing a documentary on the Eiffel Tower. So I think, there's some documentable stories in the French World's Fairs, and urban development, as well as I think the Mount Holyoke story and women in science. These women missionaries in particular, I think their stories are very compelling. And I might say two of the schools I'm looking at in this study that I'm working on now were in South Africa. One still exists in Ananda outside Durban. It's in essentially Zulu land. And the other is no longer, it got absorbed into the one of the universities near Wellington, South Africa. It was in Wellington. It's north of Cape Town. So those are two that I wanted to do. And the one in Ananda was set up by the American Board by women from the United States for Zulu young girls, women, and it still exists. And I visited that one, so that was really, so that the only place I've really been in Africa is South Africa. And my friend was in, Sorry, my friend was in Cameroon. So.
Oh, okay. Now, actually, I lived in South Africa for a year in 2020 when everything was going on. I was in South Africa because, they closed the borders and it was hard for people to fly around, but I really, had a good time there.
Where were you in?
I lived in Johannesburg. Are you familiar with a neighborhood called Maboneng?
Not, I didn't go to Johannesburg. I've heard of Maboneng, but I stayed in Durban and then I went to Ananda. So Johannesburg, I think, is very different from Durban.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. If you go from Johannesburg to Cape Town to Durban, the demographics are very different. But Maboneng, the neighborhood I stayed in, it's like an art district. So the poets, the musicians, the drummers, the photographers, the singers, the most creative people that you will find, in the Johannesburg, Soweto area, they always come out there and perform and sell their artwork and fashion and music and stuff like that. So it definitely is a very, very cool place.
Well, if you have to be caught somewhere and can't get out, that doesn't sound bad.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Let me see. Okay, now I wanted to ask you this. You mentioned, art and things like that, but do you actually make art yourself?
I did at one time, and I thought about becoming an artist. I also took a class at the Rhode Island School of Design when I was teaching there in printmaking, which I liked a lot. But I realized I wasn't that talented, and it was also, it's very isolating, and I had two small children, so I I couldn't really do it. But I have, my son is a very serious, internationally known potter or ceramic artist, and he makes a living at it. But I decided I would do better in museum work and being an academic, getting my degree. So talking about it rather than doing it.
Wow, wow. Okay, okay. But I mean, the work that you're doing is definitely needed, is definitely amazing because, so many people take history for granted. History is very, very important. It can be empowering, if you take the time out to learn about, so many things that happen.
Yeah, well, I've learned so much from doing history. You come to a certain knowledge, but I've learned a lot. Can't say how useful it is, but I like to try to communicate it. I think museums, as I said, are a great way if you go into history or you're interested in history, to do it through museums or work with the artifacts. Uh, and museums are very interesting places these days. There's a lot of new approaches to understanding the artifacts and the history of the artifacts, particularly from the point of view of African Americans, Native Americans. I know um, LBGT people, that their whole ways of looking at collections and things in collections to be studied in new ways from these people's perspectives. So I urge people to look at history. I also think ordinary people should learn to think more historically. I think a lot of what we get in the news, maybe I'm going outside the borders of this podcast, but of my particular podcast, but I think a lot of the news, most people should sit up and question, like, this newspaper says this, let's see what another newspaper says. I also think that reporters, a lot of them are not trained in history. So it would be useful if they were. They had a certain historical consciousness to understand or give the readers an idea that what's happening today has roots or needs to be understood in terms of long-term developments. And it's, people like simple answers. What can I say? We all like simple answers, you know. But sometimes historical approaches seem complex and hard to talk about. But I think with a little effort, maybe people could help themselves. So, I might. One more thing I wanted to say was what I learned when I was I'm working on this missionary book. I had to ask myself about imperialism and racism among the missionaries. And for American missionaries that I'm studying, who came from the North, they stayed pretty much out of the Civil War issues of anti-slavery movement. There were religious people in the anti-slavery movement, but they abhorred slavery, but they had mixed attitudes about the races of the people they were trying to convert. And sometimes they had to adopt racist policies because they were, say, in the British Empire, like South Africa. And the British colonial governments forced certain restrictions on who could be educated and when they were educated. When the Zulus, for example, were educated at Inanda, they couldn't be educated to do certain things because they were being educated for a labor force. And one of the major leaders of the founders of the African National Congress was Dube, who was a graduate of the men's missionary founded college at Ananda. And he also was an ordained pastor. And he founded a school called the Adams School, which is now called Ohlange, which was a technical training school for African young men as a way to give them a modern technical education, but essentially they were still within the British idea that Black people should be educated to be a labor force. But Dube then, he did found the African National Congress. He was also friends with Gandhi. They lived next door to each other. I learned all this, you know, it's like, I didn't know this at all. So history can be enlightening even to historians.
Yes, indeed. I appreciate you sharing that. That's very interesting as well. And to add to your point, like museums are some very, very um amazing places because I found like I've traveled all over the world. I've been to about 70 countries, and there are a lot of museums. They don't allow you to take pictures. You can't film. So in order to see more, you got to keep going to different museums, and you'd be surprised, how empowering that experience can be.
Have you been to the National Museum in Kenya?
Which museum is that?
Well, in Kenya, there's a national museum, I think in Nairobi.
I believe so. I've been to Kenya. I've been to Kenya maybe 4 or 5 times. I've been to Mombasa and Nairobi. I think I have.
Well, the other thing is that a lot of artifacts that were taken by colonials, the Benin bronzes, for example, a lot of them are being repatriated to their African homes, where in certain circumstances there are museums founded that can take care of them, the sort of, and a lot of Native American items actually are being sent back to the tribes, but then they're not in museums, but they're being put back to use in tribal rituals.
Okay.
Museums are really interesting places.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always up to go to a new museum. So, yes, I want to thank you so much for coming on the platform. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate your contribution, your books, your research, your teaching. And I look forward to, the future projects that you have coming.
Okay, well, let me know if you want to do a documentary.
Oh, wow. That would be amazing. Yes.
So, but I hope someday to meet you in person, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you and your listeners, viewers.
Likewise, likewise. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. It's been a phenomenal episode of Taye Speaks. So until next time, peace.